the Revolution of 1848 to 1849, and the War of Independence. The great U.S. President Abraham Lincoln's 1863 Gettysburg Address contained the ultimate nod to democracy with those now immortalized words, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people." However, few are aware that those words were first used in a speech given by Lajos Kossuth in the Ohio State Legislature 11 years earlier. All for the people and all by the people. There should be nothing about the people without the people. That is democracy. Kossuth was met with great enthusiasm when he visited America in 1851. He was cheered by tens of thousands as he marched down Broadway in New York, and his speeches garnered interest nationwide. Alongside Lincoln, the eminent American philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson also expressed admiration for Kossuth, stating that Americans have been hungry to see the man whose extraordinary eloquence is seconded by the splendor and solidity of his actions. Kossuth was the first foreign statesman since France's Marquis de Lafayette to address a joint session of Congress. Statues were erected in his honor in numerous American cities, including the capital, Washington, D.C., and New York, where one was unveiled on March 15, 1928. Several American towns, as well as a county in Iowa, bear his name. So, why did Lajos Kossuth become a hero in the eyes of Americans? How did the Hungarians become known as a nation of freedom in 1848? And was the sacrifice of thousands of lives worth the cause? Pozsony, Vienna, and Pest. Hungarian parliamentary sessions in 1848 opened the same as usual. Despite the National Liberals having gained a majority in the lower chamber, many were initially skeptical that proposals advocating for civic transformation, constitutional governance, and greater national independence would be successful. This was due to opposition from both the upper chamber and the government in Vienna. However, a wave of European revolutions that erupted in February 1848 in Italy and France hailed a decisive turning point. On March 3rd, recognizing that the moment had come, Lajos Kossuth, the leader of the opposition, submitted a bill to the parliament in Pozsony. It not only outlined the core demands of the Reform Age, but went further, calling for constitutional changes within both Hungary and the rest of the Habsburg Empire. Kossuth's bill reverberated throughout the empire, contributing to the outbreak of revolution in Vienna on March 13th. Consequently, Chancellor Metternich was forced to flee, and Emperor Ferdinand V to promise Hungarians their own constitution. The events in Vienna had a ripple effect on the parliament in Pozsony. The upper chamber, which had hitherto been hesitant, immediately accepted Kossuth's bill, and on March 15th, a parliamentary delegation took it to Vienna by steamboat for the emperor to sign. There, Kossuth and the Hungarian delegation, who were considered the bearers of independence, were met with grand celebrations. Meanwhile, on the same day, the citizens of Pest also joined in the ongoing discourse between Pozsony and Vienna. March 15th, 1848. News of the revolution in Vienna reached Pest, more specifically the Pilvax Café, on the evening of March 14th. It was a gathering place for journalists, intellectuals, poets, lawyers, and university students who identified themselves as Young Hungary. The poet Sándor Petőfi was one of its leaders. Despite being just 25 years old, he was one of their older members. Standing beside him was a young Mór Jókai, who'd later become Hungary's most prominent 19th-century writer. Rather than advocating for more measured reforms, they sought radical and revolutionary transformation. They'd already set down their demands a few days earlier in a 12-point document, with Petőfi writing an inspiring poem entitled National Song. On March the 15th, a group of 10 to 15 young people set forth in the pouring rain, with increasing numbers joining them at the university and on the streets. By 9:30, several hundred people had gathered at University Square. Mór Jókai read out the 12 points, and Petőfi recited his national song. By then, the crowd knew the refrain by heart. "We hereby swear that the yoke of slavery we no more shall wear." They then marched to a printing press where, without the mandatory censorship permit, they printed copies of the poem and the 12 points, thus demonstrating their demand for freedom of the press. Whilst the printing was underway, they delivered speeches that inspired the rapidly growing crowds outside, which had already swelled to some 5,000. Jókai even managed to convince the masses in the snowy rain to close their umbrellas as a symbol of their unwavering determination. In the afternoon, they gathered again by the National Museum, proceeding to the Royal Governing Council in Buda to demand the abolition of media censorship and secure the release of the only political prisoner, Mihály Táncsics. The April Laws. As a consequence of the revolutions in Vienna and Pest, the Emperor and King Ferdinand V yielded to Hungary's demands, appointing an autonomous Hungarian government independent of the Viennese administration. The government, led by Lajos Kossuth, included the most distinguished figures of the reform era: Lajos Kossuth as Minister of Finance, Ferenc Deák as Minister of Justice, József Eötvös as Minister of Religion and Public Education, and István Széchenyi as Minister of Public Employment and Transportation. In the weeks that followed, the parliament in Pozsony rapidly adopted transformative laws concerning the emancipation of the serfs, equal taxation, democratic parliamentary representation, freedom of the press, and the reunification of Hungary and Transylvania. On April the 11th, the monarch sanctioned the package of laws, and within less than a month, Hungary became a modern constitutional state. Transylvania's parliament also confirmed the union, and in the summer of 1848, Hungary's first democratic election based on popular rather than feudal representation took place. With the so-called April Laws, the relationship between Hungary and the Habsburg Empire, at least from the Hungarian government's perspective, was more like a personal rather than a political union, with the two nations connected only by the monarch they shared. The Austrian government, however, sought to maintain complete control over certain issues such as the military. It considered Hungary's independence an excessive concession it was forced to make under pressure, and initially even attempted covert means to undermine it. After the imperial army successfully suppressed the uprisings in Prague and Italy in the summer of 1848, the Austrian government began to openly nullify laws it had previously accepted. Eventually, it sought to undermine the results of 1848 through force. From the outset, the Austrian government took advantage of the different nationalities within Hungary, using their aspirations for autonomy for this purpose. The Revolution and different nationalities in Hungary. Hungarian politicians at the time widely accepted the concept of a liberal nation-state. As such, people living in Hungary, regardless of their mother tongue or ethnic background, were considered part of the Hungarian nation, belonging to a single political community. Whilst they were free to use their mother tongue in personal interactions and religious and cultural contexts, they did not have collective political rights based on their specific nationality. The April Laws ensured that all citizens were granted individual liberties and rights. The vast majority of Slovaks, as well as some of the Romanian and Serb communities, accepted this. However, ethnic political leaders and their followers preferred to rely on the anti-Hungarian policy of the Austrian government to enforce their further requirements. From the outset, Serbs in the borderlands, led by their imperial officers, refused to cooperate with the Hungarian government. In the summer of 1848, Hungarian government forces found themselves in battles with the Serbs. Nationalist fervor fanned the flames of bloody ethnic tensions in several locations. In Transylvania, Romanian volunteer troops who were allied with the Austrian Imperial Army carried out massacres in dozens of defenseless Hungarian settlements, killing thousands, the most notorious of which being at Nagyenyed, where on January 8, 1849, 900 Hungarian civilians were murdered. The outbreak of the War of Independence. On September 11, 1848, Ban Jelačić of Croatia and his army of 50,000 crossed the Drava River towards Pest, marching under the black and yellow banner of the empire. It was clear, however, that their aim was not the resolution of Croatian-Hungarian tensions, but the suppression of Hungary's independence. Their efforts were encouraged by the Austrian government. Lajos Kossuth's government swiftly established its defense forces, known as the Honvédség, and on September 29th, dealt a blow to the Croatian military, forcing Jelačić and his men back to the Austro-Hungarian border. On October 6th, inspired by the Hungarian success, a new revolution erupted in Vienna. However, Hungary's leadership was hesitant to cross the border and assist the revolutionaries. It was already nearing the end of October by the time the Hungarian army eventually launched its offensive, by which time it was too late, and after a lost battle they were forced to retreat. Not everyone was willing to openly declare war against the emperor. September saw the resignation of the Batthyány government, with numerous members retiring from politics. István Széchenyi completely withdrew from public life, driven to insanity by the apparently insoluble situation. Parliament appointed Lajos Kossuth to lead Hungary's War of Independence as the head of the National Defense Committee, which functioned as the de facto government. The War for Freedom and Independence. Austria sought the complete subjugation of Hungary through military means. In December, leading government circles within Vienna forced Emperor Ferdinand, who had sworn allegiance to the Hungarian crown, to abdicate, installing his 18-year-old nephew Franz Joseph in his place. By the fall of 1848, imperial forces advanced into northern Hungary, the southern borderlands, and Transylvania, whilst General Windischgrätz headed towards Pest. The army of the 30-year-old newly appointed Artur Gergely managed to slow the imperial forces' advance. But in December, Parliament and the government were forced to move headquarters from Pest to Debrecen. However, 1849 brought a turning point in the war. General Józef Bem, a Polish commander, was appointed to lead the Transylvanian army. He'd recaptured Kolozsvár by Christmas and liberated most of Transylvania by the end of January. The Hungarian army also launched an offensive on the front line, but on February the 27th, its leader, General Dębinski, another Polish general, would suffer defeat at the Battle of Kápolna. Windischgrätz sent a triumphant report to the emperor writing, "I have annihilated the rebel hordes. I hope to take control of Debrecen, the core of the rebellion, within a few days." Upon receipt of this news, the monarch issued a new constitution abolishing Hungary's independence and assimilating the fragmented country into the empire. However, Windischgrätz and the emperor were shortly to be disappointed. In March, the Hungarian army, led by General Gergely, launched a new offensive. On April the 2nd, they gained victory at Hatvan, on the 4th at Tapjobicske, and on the 6th at Ishaseg. By April the 10th, General Domjanic's troops had reoccupied Vats, followed thereafter by Gürgey's liberation of Komárom. The recapture of Buda completed the series of triumphs. In response to the new imperial constitution, Hungary's parliament convened in the Great Church of Debrecen, declaring the deposition of the Habsburg dynasty and the complete independence of Hungary. Fighting against two empires. The success of the Spring Campaign made it clear to the Austrian government that they could not handle the Hungarians on their own. As a result, Franz Joseph was forced to turn to Tsar Nicholas I of Russia for support. Field Marshal Lieutenant Haynau commanded an Austrian army of some 170,000, to which the Russians contributed a force of 200,000. The Hungarian Honvéd army consisted of only 170,000. Whilst the despotic rule of the Tsar rushed with its large forces to the aid of the autocratic Austrians, the Hungarian government received not even diplomatic support from its foreign liberal sympathizers. When the Russian envoy in London inquired about a possible British reaction to Russian intervention, the English Foreign Secretary Palmerston replied curtly and in strict confidence, "Finish them quickly." By the summer of 1849, revolutions in Europe had petered out. Look upon us, freedom, get to know your people now. Whilst others dare not shed a tear, we our blood offer to you, Petőfi wrote. However, despite the military genius and courage of Artur Gürgey, the cunning and determination of General Bem, the heroism of General Domjanic, and the countless Honvéd soldiers, Hungary could no longer repel the overwhelming forces in the summer of 1849. It was in July, during the battles in Transylvania, that poet of the revolution Sándor Petőfi lost his life. The decisive battle took place in Temesvár. Bem, fighting on the front line, fell from his horse. The battle was lost, and on August the 13th, Gürgey, vested with full authority, was forced to lay down arms. Reprisals. Some military and political leaders escaped abroad, but many fell victim to retaliation from the emperor. Known as the Austrian Butcher, Julius von Haynau, appointed as Austria's all-powerful military commander, is remembered in Hungarian history as a ruthless executioner. 150 men were executed for their participation in the revolution: soldiers, politicians, ordinary citizens, priests, and rural notaries, the latter for simply daring to state the decrees of the Hungarian government. On October 6, 1849, retaliation reached its peak when Lajos Batthyány, the Hungarian Prime Minister, was executed in Pest, and in Arad, 12 generals and 1 colonel of the Honvéd army also suffered the same fate. In addition, thousands were sentenced to imprisonment, hard labor, or conscripted into the Austrian army for years to follow. Hungary's War of Independence was vanquished, its territory was carved up, and even the limited autonomy it formerly held was abolished. The country was merged as a province into the empire, and the different national groups within Hungary were not granted any collective rights either. However, Hungary's 18-month-long fight for freedom and the lives lost would not be in vain. The emancipation of the serfs and economic and social modernization could not be reversed, and over time, Vienna had to yield to Hungarian demands for independence. One of the greatest poets of the period, Germany's Heinrich Heine, wrote the following in 1849. "When I hear of Hungary, I feel my German doublet too tight, as if I heard the roar of the sea and the wild sound of trumpets." Fighting for the values of 1848 to 49 became a never-ending source of self-confidence for Hungarians, an achievement in itself. And, from time to time, the wild sound of the trumpet can still be heard in all its glory, emerging from the depths of the Hungarian soul.